Hi, I'm Stephen Budden. I recommend you to start writing and journaling and surfacing what's underneath right now. Thomas Mann, famous novelist, wrote 1 page per day. He just wrote one finished page per day and he set that as his life's work. I learned about this from Henry Miller. I think it was in the book, The Books in My Life. And so isn't that beautiful that you don't even have to be a legendary writer. It's just that this person was a legendary writer and only committed that much time per day. Now, it could take you a short amount of time or a long amount of time to write one finished, polished work page. I think Stephen King writes 5 pages per day. And these are both writers, and I'm not really advocating you writing for a career or anything like that. I encourage writing in order to understand ourselves, transform the world, learn to market, learn to voice your ideas, learn to enroll people into stories. Because if you don't use your voice, someone else co-opts and uses it for you. And I think the best way to understand logic and reason is by reasoning with yourself over time. You start to hear the logical arguments, you can come back to the logical arguments, you can start to see where you think and who you think, where you stand and who you are. I think that's very pivotal. I like to use a vintage typewriter for this process. I also use an AlphaSmart FreeWrite, and I use a Remarkable Typefolio, and I use a computer, and I use a pen. It just depends on what piece of my being I'm wanting to access. And the reason I don't only use a computer or a tablet or something is because I just find that affects the frequency of thought. The frequency is in the vibration of thought. The screen is a certain kind of addictive impulse, and there's a refresh rate, and there's EMFs, and there's all the other things that go with this digital technology. So I encourage you to try out other technologies and find the place where you can write your page per day. At first, if you're just sitting there, just make your to-do list for the next day, make your plan for the next year, write out your ideal vision, write out last night's dream, write out how a scene with your child played out or a scene with your mother. Start to just flesh out your interior world and make something real. As Werner Erhard said, until what is significant is created by you, you are living some inherited life. Why are we not the ones creating the significant works? Like I tell clients, are you the moth or are you the flame? Are you flying into the furnace of glittery objects all around you? Or are you the lighthouse that people are swept toward? They're becoming part of your tribe. There's this idea of an influencer, and I think it's kind of oversimplified and ludicrous. However, once you do have a certain power of influence, you do have the ability to change the course of people's beliefs, even if it's just 0.0001% of humans. That's still compelling enough to be worth putting energy into it, don't you think? Now again, how does one human influence another? Through words. How do you practice words? Through writing and speaking. However, the two are overlapping yet different impulses. Most speakers know how to write, and they learned about speaking by reading speeches, and they wrote their own speeches, so they are writers first and foremost, and so are you. The thing that makes people think they're not a writer is because they don't write like so-and-so. And the reason we look up to so-and-so, Faulkner or Bukowski or whoever, is because they start to learn to write like themselves, or Kerouac. So you start to learn to write like yourself, and all that takes is a bunch of writing. It's like that Malcolm Gladwell, the 10,000 hours of mastery. So write, and I ask you now to commit. Can you commit to a page per day until you get your alternative screenless writing technology? You can write with a pen. There aren't really excuses, are you? Are there? Are you an excuse for living not fully, or are you a justification for living fully? What are we doing with our lives? If we're the antidote to insanity, then what does that look like? So some things that can help are just carve it out in your calendar. Once it's in your calendar, it's real. Wake up earlier if you don't have any time in the day. Right on your lunch break, write at night. Remember, the page per day is not that high of a bar, and you can even define page with a little bit of semantics. How many lines, how many words, how many written lines, what size is the page? You make the goal for yourself so that you can move forward and start to get a clear understanding of the world, because we need to make more objective decisions. And as these events come toward us, we need the ability to stay calm and reason with ourselves. There's a lot of studies that show that this idea of journaling, this idea of writing, this idea of like semi-autobiographical fiction writing, psychologically brings the human organism back into balance. How can that be? Well, for one thing, we're designed to live and move forward, to do, and then to be, and then to reflect on what was done. So as Kierkegaard said, we live life looking forwards. Unfortunately, we understand looking backwards. So you're always on the precipice of your own understanding, which you only gather up and create through this process of like introspection, looking, oh, I have every client write down their whole life story. And a few of them have published books about it. This could be the whole process. I also lead a page per day challenge with people that are into vintage writing machines and alternative writing machines because it's fun and because it's edifying and you can grow through it. And I find that no matter what we do, the conversation requires looking back and understanding. The fictional story we tell ourselves, we mistake it for nonfiction. If you're walking through the world right now like, this is what happened to me, you haven't really analyzed it. I have clients tell the story in 3 different ways. And the reason we retell the story in 3 different ways, which I'm not going to break down here, but it's a very powerful process, is because where you are now is determined by what you think your story was. It's not determined by events. It's determined by your response to events. All of your, like if you're the Enneagram, where you fit in that scale, if you're a certain Myers-Briggs personality type, where you fit in that scale, everything is in reaction to events. So you learned reaction, you got some sort of payback, you got paid under the table in this racket, as Werner Erhard would say the story. You learned to win at this game, as Eric Berne would phrase it in his seminal book, and you just carried on with that as though that's real. Everyone who excavates their story more deeply finds that that was not real. I'm not saying things didn't happen to us. I'm saying what you think happened didn't happen. And the stories and the archetypes we project onto the people in positions of power, they're not real. If you project, because in working with clients, I saw that if I worked with the mother, I'd get a totally different justified story. And if I worked with a daughter, I'd get a totally different justified story. The mother wouldn't come and be like, in the first iteration of the story, that we might reach this, I was a terrible mother. I always did this to my daughter. I was evil. The 2 stories never align like that. And likewise, even if the daughter starts saying, she was always terrible to me, she was evil, we start to excavate that and she can be like, oh, like, you're right. Was she ever not evil? She did take care of me sometimes. This is an idea of how you excavate the story. The way you excavate a story is by writing it down, making it real. You can sit and cogitate and ponder the story, or the cogitators, as my friend said, and that will bring you some relief. However, because the patterns are so ingrained in your mind and body, it's more than likely you're going to fall back into them. If you have this page here, you're like, oh man, writing this that's real, it's hard to sit with it. If you look at Henry Miller, I think he's a genius, and Alan Watts said his work, Tropic of Cancer, was like the closest thing to Zen that he'd seen, because it was just him acknowledging all the light and darkness of his life, and like as a reporter would, and being very self-aggrandizing in some parts and self-deprecating in other parts. And that's how I want you to go about it. You don't have to read that if it makes you queasy. However, find a way to be honest with yourself about your own life. You're not writing this to justify anything. Oh, I'm here where I am because blah 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 blah. That's sometimes the first impulse. However, the page per day, the consistency shows that an impulse falls apart. You run out of justification and you start to say, okay, maybe I created this situation in these 5 ways. That's not shifting blame to you, it's shifting blame away from someone else and reclaiming power. The writing of the page per day, the being a writer, the identifying with a writer brings your power back to the moment. You are a writer. I had a client that was in court over a custody battle for his daughter, and he was just like getting swept away by the trauma, and the woman was lying, so he could not even respond when he was supposed to. He was like locked in this frigid position in fight or flight response. So what I did was I had him start writing down what had happened. The story in his mind. And then we found that as he wrote the story, he could be more objective with the story, right? This is how it goes. Being more objective, life as it is, that's what the Buddha was moving toward, and that's what he advocates moving toward. Life as it is. I forget the Sanskrit term. My astrologer back in the day would often tell me this. He was a Vedic astrologer. And so after this client was able to put this objective hat on when he needed to, he brought that to the courtroom. And I told him, think about going into the courtroom like you're the novelist, you're the writer. You're going to go in there and write your thing down. So he was able to access a completely different state because he saw where he was being, cloying and immature and reactionary before, and he could be mature because his explosions were not helping his case. Right? He was supposed to show that he was together and he was calm. He'd be like, "Yeah, she did this and she did," and every time the woman's argument would be proved by his reactionary nature. And it's often like this. I had a friend, I would say, she'd do some angry thing and it upset someone, break out into a rash, mess up her life for a while, and she'd justify it by saying, "Rage is holy, I deserve to be in rage." And that's just a product of not looking at your life closely enough. If you deserve a lot of things, and to be in rage is a very low bar. You also deserve to be happy in a beautiful, free-flowing channel of the life force. Let's say holy happiness rather than holy rage. If everything's holy, then that's an example of a story that arose out of automatic responses that didn't have anything correlating with actual reality. And that's an example of something that would be remedied by writing, because this person had trouble writing. Because of the one core problem, I'm not a writer. You're a writer now. This is an invitation to be a writer. Did you think you were a writer before and you gave it up? Have you never been a writer? Some great writers started that way. I always think of Vincent van Gogh because he wasn't an artist. He sucked. His draftsmanship is terrible. He just did it until he found his voice. Now he's one of the greatest ones alive. Again, I'm not asking you to become one of the greatest writers alive. That's probably not your ambition. It doesn't really matter. I'm only asking you to become enlightened through this process of writing. And is that a high bar? Is that a higher bar than writing the greatest novel ever? Enlightenment is like it reaches a bridge of objectivity. It starts with subjectivity. It's like when someone says, "You be you." What they're saying is, "I can't take your criticism, you be you." If they weren't saying that, what they would mean was, "You be you and I'll be me," and that's the highest states of being we can attain. And if writing every day consistently helps you be you, then that is enlightenment. Congratulations. You're on the bridge to enlightenment. When you catch yourself in anger, rage, reaction, that's beautiful. Let yourself catch yourself in that, because you can see, oh, I went here and here and here. I went here and here and here. You can only record those mechanisms a few times where they are forced to stop being automatic. If you're posturing in writing, I'm going to make myself look like a legendary ladies' man or like a legendary philanthropist. That's a different thing. And it's obviously propping up your fiction. The reason there's consistency is because you can't prop up your fiction that much. And I don't even care if you publish your thing. You may publish it under a pseudonym if that's your choice. You may, build an audience as you go. The caveat was that if you're using your own name is that you want people to think certain things about yourself. It's not because you're unenlightened, it's because you're human. And the tribe has certain expectations, and we try to live within those. That's understandable. So this process that I'm advocating is more for your self-development. You may publish something in the future. I had a client that ended up publishing his book, 2 of them actually, and one of them, he changed a lot of the names, and he still got warnings from them that they were upset, and it's blah, 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 blah. It's not for that. However, he reached a higher level of self-awareness and therefore enlightenment. So I was happy with that. That's great. And publishing, again, is a choice. So the main summary is write every day. A page per day is an ideal measurement. It's already been done. You're moving toward becoming a better writer, moreover, a better thinker. This will unearth and excavate your unconscious patterns and make them conscious. And that's what Jung said enlightenment or self-actualization was. You're moving from being other people, other people's beliefs, living in response to yourself, your own beliefs, living in harmony. You could say living in response to events rather than reaction to events, because your life as you've been living is in reaction to the past. Now you're going to live as a beautiful link in a chain in harmony from the past. Isn't that great? So whether your father was a drug addict or your mother was abusive or your parents disappeared, and we've had all of these stories and more in this Rapture Institute, it doesn't really matter because you're the beautiful being that you have been. And what stories are you telling about this? The greatest stories come from the unconscious mind. That's where you connect to the collective unconscious and collect the archetypes that make sense to you and filter your energy back into that. So shut down the noise. Like, you're on social media right now. Cool, you learned this thing. Cool. The next, if you stay on it too long, you've wasted the next X amount of moments of your life. And that probably even a lot of this was necessary. I find a lot of what we look at is just justifying what we already know. Be done justifying what you already know. Be free to do what you need to do in the world. And this is an invitation to that. Page per day. Promise me. I love you. I'll see you on the other side.